Okay, so I wanted to first start off and say welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us. We do this weekly. We're going to change it up a little bit. So instead of doing an icebreaker right off the bat, we're going to go ahead and go through our program. And then once we're finished, if you guys can stay around and want to stay around just to chat and hang out and talk a little bit more, you're more than welcome to do that after we're done. We understand everybody's time is really important. So if you can't hang out, we won't hold it against you, but we wanted to give some time to be a little more social and just kind of interact a little bit more with each other, you know, since we have to keep our distance from people right now. So that's going to be a little bit change in the format. The same. We have some new faces, which I'm really excited about. And so I just wanted to go over really quick what we are, Envoys for Humanity. And basically what we are is we're a social network that connects passionate volunteers with the best organizations out there to match their concern. And then we also connect with each other and we make new friends all over the country doing that. And so that's what we are all about. And yes, thank you. And just a reminder, if you could put where you're from and your email in the chat, and then that way we have a way, you know, to get in touch with you guys after the fact. And so I think that is it. So we have, each week we do this, we try to find really pressing, important topics out there that people are interested in. And so feel free if you think of anything or you have a special skill that you would like to be showcased on our program, our weekly event, then definitely feel free to do that too. You can put it in the chat. And we can reach out to you if you have a specialty or something that you're passionate about that we can bring to the rest of our envoys. And so on that note, we have two amazing guests here, I guess three, if you count the band as two people. And so I'm gonna hand it over to Scott so he can do an introduction of who they are and what they're all about.
Thanks, Kari. So yeah, we are so excited to have a guest that tie in our action item and our discussion. And what has happened here is Warren, who I will introduce next, has been so kind as to bring to us collaborators to introduce her. And let me just say, if y'all could, I think everybody's mic is oh Renee, yours came back on. I tried to mute it. There it is. Okay, you're muted again because you're feeding back. Okay, so yeah, so we have Project Amplify, which is a project put together by Warren.
Oh, shoot.
Voices of the children, refugees from Latin America through all kinds of art, and songs have been some of the most amazing parts of that endeavor. And so tonight we're lucky enough to have Dan Wetzel and Kristen Granger with us. They are one half of the band True North. And I think that we can go ahead and cut to them in Oregon. Kristen, Dan, would y'all tell us just a little bit about how you came across Project Amplify and a little bit about the songwriting process that came to be in the song that resulted?
Sure. Thanks so much for inviting us to be a part of this. And really, the big thank you goes to Warren for all the work that she does and continues to do and has always done on behalf of the world's children. I've known Warren for a long time. We worked together at Willamette University, and I was aware of her work at border detention centers and her role as an inspector. And she had made known to me and to other people that Neil Young had called artists to action to say, okay, artists, this is what you do. This is what you do. You write songs and you create art that helps regular people connect with something that's important that they need to take action to change or to fix. And I've always been one, I've been a folk singer a long time, and I've always felt that Woody Guthrie got it right when he said, it's a folk singer's job to comfort disturbed people and to disturb comfortable people. So when Warren had brought to light this project, I went to work thinking about what kind of a song I wanted to write. And because Project Amplify had made some of the testimony from the children in detention available to the public to read, those stories informed what I wanted to say. And it became clear to me, based on the things that Warren had told me and that testimony, that the children had really no idea why what was happening to them was happening to them. They didn't have any idea. Some of them didn't even know they were yet in America. They thought they were in some limbo between where they had been and where they were supposed to go. And so I decided to write a song about what a child's perspective might be and what you do to survive as a child emotionally in that situation, using two siblings. And there are two Spanish words in the song, and probably you already know them, but abuelito is Spanish for grandpa. It's the diminutive, so what you call your own grandfather is abuelito, means grandpa. And then abuelos is grandfathers, the term grandfather. So both those words appear in the song, and it's called The Ghost of Abuelito, and it's written by me last June 2019.
Woo!
Miguel, my brother, he's 11. I am Alma, I am 7, old enough to remember home.
Oh, yeah.
Sound of gunfire in the night, an ordinary part of life, at least the only life I've ever known. Miguel refused to cry the day, heading on the USA. Even when we gave our dog away, even after throwing stones to make her stay. He says the ghost of Abuelito comes to him when he's afraid. His spirit comes down from the stars, the smells of coffee.
Hey guys.
Across the border, things got tense, with our backs against the fence, all those uniforms and guns. Americanos took our mother in one direction and us the other. We haven't seen another since. Inside, 100 babies cry. I can't stop myself from always asking why. When will my mama come to get? Did she go off and forget? And Miguel just takes my hand and sighs. He says the ghost of Abuelito comes to us when we're afraid. The spirit comes down from the stars, still smells of coffee and cigars. But when he is there, we'll both be brave. Abuelito wanted it that way. He says Abuelito told him, America will always take you in. Her gates are guarded by a goddess. She welcomes you no matter where you've been. Minutes to hours, days to weeks, Miguel, my brother, hardly speaks. Bit by bit, he's disappearing. I asked him if he'd say the prayer, the one that brings Abuelito here. He says Abuelito's hard of hearing. Inside, 100 babies cry. Ones that are old enough to talk, keep asking why. When will our mama come again? Did she go off and forget? bring our mothers soon.
Wow. Thank you guys. That was awesome. I think in the midst of that song, we got Zoom bombed. Those our friends from to support us. And so I don't know if we've been wondering when the Zoom bomb was going to come, and today it came. But that was amazing, you guys. And I think we got, at least from my ears, I got most of it towards the last half of the song. There was a little bit of distraction, so we apologize for that. I think it's the nature of the beast.
Scott, can you unmute them?
Yeah, somebody's on that somewhere.
Are we there? Are you live there? Hello?
Yeah, now you're back.
Okay, I was just gonna say, if you missed the song and you want to hear it again, it's on our website, which is truenorthband.com. And if you click on videos, there's a couple options for you to choose from there. We also entered it in the NPR Tiny Desk concert, so hopefully that you'll see it there too.
Yeah, that's a great version of it there on the Tiny Desk. Nicely done.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right.
So everybody, I believe we might be able to get another song out of Kristen and Dan at the end. We'll see if everybody minds their manners and we don't squash them again. That was we're so lucky to have you guys on board here, and we're going to go ahead and move on towards the next segment here with Professor Warren Binford. Warren has really been a transformational figure in the world of children's international rights, and she has been at the university, at Willamette University, for over a decade now, and she has also transformed elements of that law school. I know she is beloved there by the students and the leaders at the school alike, as she is by her colleagues around the world. She is a Fulbright scholar who has done work in South Africa and Canada with regards to the Fulbright. She has founded Project Amplify, as we have mentioned, has been a part of the Flores team that has been keeping the U.S. government honest during this crazy time, and they keep the U.S. government honest during all times. She has been at this for decades now, and so she's truly one of my heroes. And Warren, you're going to go ahead and you're going to come on the screen as soon as you start talking, but I would like to just prompt you by just coming at us with starting off with a general overview of how the situation is playing out at this point in time down on the border with the children, and especially in light of the pandemic.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Scott, for that kind introduction. And thank you, particularly to Kristen and Dan for sharing their music with us. I do some really difficult work, and it's hard for people to hear about and hard to process. And when we have artists and others who come forward and are able to tell the children's stories through really beautiful music or beautiful artwork, it helps to educate everybody about the reality of what's going on with regard to the way that our government is treating these children. You asked, Scott, about what's going on right now with the children at the border. And what we're seeing is that we have 3,000 children who are currently in the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. We have another 380 or so children that are in the custody of ICE. Those numbers are relatively unmute my. When I went to the Border Patrol facility last June, and when I was there, there were over 14,000 children who were being kept by the United States government. The children at the Clint facility were being kept in a loading dock, windowless warehouse, and jail cells, really overcrowded conditions that were meant for adult males. And so seeing the numbers go down from over 14,000 children to just a few thousand children, you would think would be cause for celebration, but it's really not. And the reason that it's not is that part of the drop in the number of children that we're seeing on the border right now is a result of the migrant protection protocols. Now, the migrant protection protocols offer no protection whatsoever. Basically, what they do is they force children who arrive in the United States as part of a family unit to go to Mexico, even though they don't have any relationship with Mexico, even though there's nowhere for them to stay in Mexico, even though there are no resources, nowhere for their parents to work in Mexico. It forces them to go to Mexico, and then it puts them into this Byzantine process that creates a Kafkaesque life for them, where they are not sure about what the future holds, or a number of kidnappings that the children and families that I've interviewed have reported. There are sexual assaults, rapes, there are gang attacks. Two of the children who were interviewed by one of my colleagues were killed before he even got on the airplane home after his first set of interviews a little over a year ago. So it's a very dangerous situation, and we fear that that's where a lot of the children are right now. We've actually been moving a lot of our interviewing of the children to Mexico because so many are being kept down there. In addition to that, we have some other Human Rights Watch team. Human Rights Watch is one of the organizations that I partner with a lot. There are a number of Human Rights Watch teams that are on the southern border of Mexico, and they're interviewing children and families there. And what they're learning on that border is that the Mexican government and the Guatemalan government are trying to keep the children south of Mexico so that they don't even make it to the Mexican-US border. And of course, just south of Mexico is the Northern Triangle. Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador are the main countries that we're seeing children come from since 2014. And those are countries that pretty much have a failed government. These are failed states that are unable to protect these children and their families, which is one of the reasons why they're coming to the United States. They're coming to the United States for the security that we have here, the social security, the security of our society that we have here, and the fact that most of these children do have parents or other family members living in the United States. So they're trying to reunify their families in safe environments. So we're seeing a number of children being placed or forced down into the Northern Triangle, where they're being kept by both the Guatemalan authorities and the Mexican authorities. For those children who make it into Mexico, we're hearing reports of them being arrested by the Mexican federal government and then detained in facilities in central Mexico, in the interior, where we're not able to get to the children and interview them. And then for the children who make it to the border, if they arrive unaccompanied, then under the MPP, under the migrant protection protocols, the government is supposed to let them into the United States, and they're supposed to care for them appropriately and release them expeditiously, placing them with the family here in the United States. For those who arrive as family units, those are the children who are being sent back to Mexico. Now, the conditions are so bad in Mexico that what the parents have started to do is to send their children across the border by themselves, so that they come across as unaccompanied children, and then the parents know that at least the children will survive because the conditions are so bad in Mexico. Once the children arrive in the United States, they're supposed to be processed very quickly by the Border Patrol. They're not supposed to be in Border Patrol facilities for more than a few hours, 72 hours maximum in almost all situations. And then they're supposed to be processed in an ICE facility if they are with the family, or sent to an ORR facility, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, and the children are supposed to be processed in no more than 20 days under that Flores lawsuit that Scott referred to in his introduction. What we are seeing is that many of these children over the last few years under this administration are being kept in these facilities for sometimes 9 months or longer. rather than being processed in 20 days and placed with their families in the United States. The interviews that have been conducted in recent weeks, we found that although these children should have been released right away, many of them are being kept for several months without explanation by the government. And so what happened was the children's attorneys, the Flores team, which is one of the other teams that I work with, they brought a lawsuit in March because they were hearing about coronavirus breaking out in the facilities where the children were being kept. And as we know, in congregate facilities, because of the highly contagious nature of the coronavirus, it creates an unsafe environment for these children. And so they brought a motion for a temporary restraining order requiring the government to release these children. And that has been actively litigated for the last 4 weeks until the court issued a order on Friday, basically saying that you are holding these children far too long in unsafe and unhealthy conditions in violation of your obligations, federal government, and you're placing these children's lives at risk. I've ordered you before, and I'm going to order you again to release these children to their families, other loved ones, other potential guardians here in the United States as quickly as possible, and stop holding these children for 30, 60, 90 days, sometimes, months before sending them to their families. And so that's the situation that we're at right now, is that the federal government is working with other countries' governments to keep the children as far south as possible. We're basically externalizing our borders. Those that make it into Mexico are being kept in Mexico in the interior. Those who make it to the border, only the unaccompanied children are being led across. Those that are in Mexico are being kept in abhorrent conditions. Those who are in the United States are being held in facilities against court order, federal court order, and are at high risk of contracting coronavirus. We, in fact, do have confirmation that a number of the children have been diagnosed with coronavirus, and one of the kind of Kafkaesque aspects of this, I use that word a lot when describing what these kids are going through in these systems, is that the US government was saying, well, we're not going to release the children to any states in which there are stay-at-home orders that have been issued, which at this point is almost every state in the country. And then they've also said, we're not going to release children from any facilities where any staff or other children have been diagnosed with coronavirus. And as you can imagine, more and more of these congregate care facilities do have outbreaks of coronavirus. And then in addition to that, the federal government is saying, and we're not going to release the children to any home where there hasn't been a home inspection and background checks and fingerprinting. But as you can imagine, the licensing facilities have stopped doing background checks. They've stopped doing fingerprinting. They've stopped doing the home inspections. And so these kids are caught in this state of suspension. And some of them are relatively young. Others are turning 18 in the facilities because they're not being processed appropriately. And then the day that they turn 18, they're handed over to ICE for deportation, because adults are subject to deportation orders that children are not subject to. But because they're holding these kids basically hostage in these facilities, some of the kids are aging out and then being sent back to the same countries that they tried to escape from in the first place. So that's a basic overview of what we're seeing with children at the border right now, Scott.
Wow. Well, Warren, I know that last year, was it June, when you and the Flores team blew the whistle on the conditions you discovered in Clint outside of El Paso? And can you talk a little bit about kind of not only what you discovered and whatnot, but what that was just like for you as an advocate and a mom and a person who's seen a lot in your life, to experience that, and kind of the aftermath of bringing that to light on the national media, and what that was like personally.
Yeah, so basically what happened is I was asked a few years ago to join the inspection team for these facilities where kids are being met, to make sure that their rights are being honored and respected in these facilities. And right away, from the moment that I started doing these inspections several years ago, it was clear that children's rights were not being respected. And we would interview the children, and when they had reports that they wanted to share with the judge, we would prepare sworn testimony, sworn declarations from them, and then submit those to the judge to consider in trying to monitor what was happening with these kids. And I was asked to do one of these trips last June, and to be honest with you, I didn't really want to do it because I was about to go overseas for the summer to do some lecturing in Tokyo, but I felt compelled to try and squeeze in this one last trip before leaving. And I'm so glad that I did, because when we walked into that facility, they handed us a sheet of 352 children in a facility that was only licensed for 104 adult men. And we immediately started to scan that sheet, and we could see that we looked at the ages of the children on the right-hand side of the sheet, and it said 0, 2, 4, 0, 5, 7, 14. There were infants, toddlers, preschoolers, school-age children, teenagers, and they were all being kept together in this facility, and we couldn't figure out where they were keeping them. And we started to demand of the Border Patrol, who was managing that facility, that we wanted to go and meet with these children where they were being kept, and they wouldn't let us outside of the large conference room. And we said, okay, we'll start bringing us these children as quickly as possible. And we immediately said, bring us the child mothers, bring us the sickest kids, bring us the youngest kids, bring us the kids who have been here the longest. And they started to bring in these children, and these children were absolutely filthy. Some of them broke down crying immediately. Some of them were angry and didn't understand why they were being kept there. They started to describe conditions that were unimaginable, particularly in the United States of America, of being forced to sleep on concrete floors with no blankets, no blow-up mattresses, not being given showers, no soap, no hot water, no toothbrushes, no toothpaste, being fed frankenfood, and not enough of that, where they were being fed basically fruit punch and instant oatmeal and frozen burritos for not just a day or two, but literally weeks on end. Some of the children had been kept in these facilities, in this facility for over 3 weeks. They were describing being kept in what sounded like a warehouse with no windows. And when we were asking the Border Patrol officers about this, they would not describe for us where they were keeping these kids. So after the first day of these interviews, some of the children were so traumatized that they couldn't even speak. After the first day of interviews, we drove around the facility, and sure enough, in the southeastern corner of the property, there appeared to be a newly erected giant warehouse without windows that looked like that corrugated metal, instant warehouse that you could buy at a Home Depot and just prop up in a couple of days. The children had been describing broken air conditioners that leaked cold water across the concrete floor, and how they try and move their bodies down the floor to try and get away from this water in the middle of the night, because it would cause them to, freeze to the point of shaking. And we drove around to the side of it, and we saw these 9 porta potties, and the kids had described going to the bathroom outside, and we talked about how they'd be locked in at night and the guards wouldn't let them out. And so they talked about one boy talked about his little brother, who was about 6 or 7 years old, and had to wear diapers because they wouldn't let him out at night to go to the bathroom in the porta potties. And we're like, oh my God, they are keeping these kids in this warehouse out in the middle of the desert. And sure enough, we went back the next day. We took pictures of it. We couldn't believe what we heard. And then the next day, as we were interviewing the kids, we asked a couple of them to draw us a picture of where it was that they were staying. And they drew a picture of that warehouse with those porta potties perfectly lined up in the, in the exact same space. as where we had seen them in the photographs that we took the evening before. And as we continued to interview the children throughout the day, that second day, and then found out the number of children who were sick in this facility, and the kids would describe arriving at the facility being perfectly healthy, and then within 48 hours, 72 hours, becoming very ill. And they described being taken into this locked room and being forced to sleep on the floor in that room without anybody to take care of them. No adults were taking care of these children anywhere in these facilities other than bringing them, this frankenfood. And we tried to go and interview the children who had been locked up in this quarantine area, and they wouldn't let us. And finally, we were able to convince them. But given how dirty the children were, how traumatized they were, we called the Flores attorneys that night after we got back from the facility, and we said, we've got a problem here. And this was the second week in a row that we had had inspections that were very upsetting. I had been asked to go on a inspection the week before in Brownsville, Texas, and there was some really horrific conditions down there as well, with kids being kept in cages, kids being very sick. There was a respiratory illness that was going around, and they had a newborn who was preemie, who had become so listless that the head of that inspection team had called the hospital and had the child sent over, the baby sent over, along with her mother, who was in a wheelchair because of a botched C-section that had just happened. And they were keeping this young mother with a C-section and this listless premature baby in a cage, literally, with a bunch of other people. And then all of these sick people all around them, and they sent a number of kids to the hospital. The head of that team ended up being in the hospital that night, and was kept there for 6 days. And basically, when we landed in Clint, we knew about what had happened on the other side of Texas that day, but we had no idea what we were walking into at Clint. And so that night, the Flores attorney said, we're going to talk about what to do. And they decided that for the first time in 22 years of conducting these inspections, that they were going to allow us to talk to the press and tell the press what we had found, because they had been trying through the court process to draw the court's attention to this. And the court was trying to order this administration to adhere to its legal obligations with regard to these kids, but rather than it getting better or even stabilizing, it was spiraling downward during the 3 years that I was conducting these site visits, to the point of children sleeping on the floor of a just windowless warehouse. And this
so is it the decision to go public to the media, was that a kind of an unprecedented move, that and something that theretofore was kind of a place that you tried not to go? It wasn't really seen as your role. How did that all kind of, can you tell us just a little about that?
Yeah, so one thing that I didn't know, but I guess was pretty influential in their decision, is that the head of the team that was in Texas the week prior, who found the premature baby and the mother in the wheelchair and all of these sick children with a severe respiratory illness, she was so upset about what she had found that she had gone to the media, but the story had not gotten any traction. And I did not know that at the time. So when we called them about what we found in Clint, they had these 2 weeks back to back. We knew about the conditions, but we didn't go to the media. And my understanding, what they explained to us later, is that given that we were seeing situations that were getting worse and worse and worse, and she had already gone to the media, that they were going to ask us to go ahead and meet with the Associated Press and tell him what we were seeing. And then what happened there is that after the third day of interviewing these kids, where all of these conditions were being verified by additional children, we ended up interviewing about 60 children during a 4-day period at Clinton and some other Border Patrol facilities that were in the El Paso area. What ended up happening is Michael Bohanek from Human Rights Watch and I met with the AP for about 3.5 hours in my hotel room on Wednesday night after the third day. And the reporter, Cesar Atanasio, he completed like 2.5, 3.5 reporters' notebooks with notes. And we gave them all these details and everything. And then the next day, the story came out and it was like 5 paragraphs long. And it started with the headline, like attorneys allege or lawyers allege. And I'm like, no, we've got hundreds of kids who are being locked up by the United States government in these really horrific conditions. And you just killed the story with that. We've spent hours, we've never done this in 22 years of doing these inspections, and now nobody's going to find out what happened with these kids. But despite that headline, despite the fact that it was just a few paragraphs long, it started to go viral. And the AP called us a couple of hours later and they said, the story's going viral, we're going to expand it significantly. So they significantly expanded it. They said, they called a couple of hours later. They said the longer version's going viral too. Can you do an interview? And I told them, you know what, I'm at the gate, I'm at the airport. And they said, well, can you come out from the gate and meet us on the other side of TSA? So I did a quick interview with the AP just as I was leaving El Paso. And then literally within 3 hours, by the time I landed in LA, my phone had totally blown up and the story had gone viral. And it was one of the most inspiring experiences for me because it showed that America cares. That the year before, when we knew that children were being separated, but the American public really didn't know about it until spring 2018. And when people found out that children were being separated from their parents, literally America was marching in the streets. And that was inspirational because it showed me that America cares. And then a year later, when people found out about children being kept in these abhorrent conditions in Clint, it was similar, that there was this outpouring of concern. And that's when, I felt like that there was hope for our country, that there was this opportunity for redemption. Even though all these horrible things have been done over the last few years, there's still so many Americans out there who care about children they've never met, families they've never met, that it gave me hope for our country's future. Then what happened is, that week, President Trump went on Twitter and he said, this is all fake news. I don't even know who this person is. He sent Vice President Pence down to the facility where our team had been the week prior, and they toured the facility, but they dressed all the kids up. They dressed them in these brightly colored sweatsuits, such as what we've seen in the ICE facilities. This is how they normally dress the kids in the ICE facilities. And that was not what the kids had been wearing that week when our team was there. They cleaned these kids up, they put clean clothes on them, they probably fed them. And then Vice President Pence, said, so are you being treated well here? And he gave them a thumbs up, and the kids smiled in their brightly colored sweatsuits and gave him a thumbs up back. And they said, see, there's nothing wrong. These kids are being treated great. And then what happened was they sent, we were interviewed by almost every single major media network in the US and many other countries in the world as well, except for Fox News. And what Fox News did was they sent a team of pastors into the Clint facility about 10 days after we had left. And they gave those pastors a tour of the facility. And then the pastors said, it looked fine to us. They didn't go in the warehouse, which is interesting. I haven't spoken to anybody who was ever allowed in the warehouse. But the pastor said the kids looked fine. There were hardly any kids there. All this is made up. And it was just amazing to me that, as a woman of faith, as someone who is raised in a Christian family, to have people who purported to be, people of God and, and of morality, to have them go in there and just whitewash this really caused me to lose faith in a lot of our religious and spiritual leadership in the country, and, as well as, at least one of our networks. And it was in that experience of seeing President Trump lying about the conditions that we had just witnessed, and then Vice President Pence also lying about the conditions, and the federal government, intentionally misleading the American people, and then to see the religious right partnering with them on it. It was that experience that caused me to turn to the artists and the musicians like Kristen and Dan. And I said, this is this is not something that I and the few people who were with me on the team, there were 10 of us on the team, this is not something that we can counter single-handedly. We are nobody, but we have all of these artists around the world who can take the children's stories, and the children's stories were out there because they had been entered into the court record, that the attorneys had filed a temporary restraining order after we discovered the children in Clint. And we made all of those declarations available, and then we did a public ask that people take these children's stories, they read their sworn testimonies, and turn them into songs, artwork, cartoons, comics, whatever, yard signs, sidewalk chart. And we've seen everything. I mean, I don't know if any of you watch, South Park? But South Park's writers took their first episode of the season and they placed it in the Clint Border Patrol facility and told the children's stories, but in a South Park way, where, you know, it was dark humor, but it was, you know, funny in a very dark and depressing kind of way, like South Park does, and very irreverent. And, you know, Neil Young, Kristen mentioned that Neil Young made a call out to musicians. We have received over 40 different songs from musicians all around the country, all around the world, who have read the children's testimonies and turned them into song. Kristen is my favorite songwriter in the world. She's just so talented, so clever and everything. And she writes very funny lyrics. She writes very moving lyrics. And when she shared with me the song that she wrote, that you had the honor to hear today, I was so moved by that. We have had, there's an art exhibit that's in DC right now. It is 1 mile from the White House. It has over 120 pieces of art that were inspired by the Children's Declaration. The comics community has come together and they have drawn all of these comics about the children's experiences and what's been going on in the border. That's been compiled in a book, and Senator Merkley, Jeff Merkley, who's been a leader on this issue, he's written the prologue to that comic book, compiling all of these comics about the children's experiences and their families' experiences and the chaos at the border. We have a children's book that's coming out that should be released this summer or this fall. And then there's one woman, Just Amanda, who has been painting a work of art every single day for over 250 days now, that contains a quote from the children, and that you can find on Just Twitter. And so it's helped to make sure that there is a historical record about what this administration has been doing to these children, and has made sure that the administration hasn't just been able to erase these children's lives and the crimes that have been committed against them.
Wow, that is what a journey, Warren. We're so lucky to get to hear that firsthand from you, and I know that the shortage of attorneys to take the depositions when it comes to the process sometimes gums up the works, and I know that Project Amplify tries to help out with that, and I know people are wondering what you can do to help. Maybe not everybody's feeling artistic, and I just want to point out that your organization is funded. You have a GoFundMe. I know you guys have raised a substantial amount of money, and is that correct? Is that going to help to get attorneys down there to get some of this work moving more expeditiously?
Yeah, so Project Amplify's purpose is not to provide attorneys for the children. There are other organizations that are doing that. So our parent organization, our sponsor, fiscal sponsor, they call it, the IRS calls it, because we're operating under their 501c3 umbrella. Project Amplify's purpose is to solely get the children's testimonies out there so that there's an accurate history about what has happened over the last few years. There are attorneys that are working with these families and their children. They include the National Center for Youth Law. Our fiscal sponsor is Lawyer Moms of America. They do pro bono work to help these children and families. They have reunited a ton of these families, provided them with airline tickets to get the children with their parents and things like that, and also to help them with representation. You've got impact litigation that's being brought by a number of organizations. Those organizations include, for example, Las Americas, which is working down in El Paso and trying to get children across the border. I'll give you an example. During a trip that I took to Juarez in January, I found this little boy, we found this little boy who was referred to us, who was 6 years old. He had come from Honduras. He had a developmental disability where he functioned as a 3-year-old, and he had been sexually abused several times between October and January when we met him. He also had been sexually abused in Honduras, and because of his disability was being discriminated against and not being provided with an education in Honduras, and they weren't protecting him. You know, the society, the failed state, wasn't protecting him from harm. So his family brought him to the US where they have family. Even though MPP is supposed to exempt children with special needs, the government sent him to Mexico, and even though they had no relationship with Mexico or any Mexicans, and even though they had no resources there, the mother repeatedly tried to bring the little boy across under, you know, the exemption to MPP. She was unable to. We then referred the family, the mother and her little boy, to Las Americas. They then tried repeatedly to get him across, and the administration literally gave him a test to see if he really was disabled, and he had a report from the Honduras government documenting his disability and everything. The CBP officials, the Border Patrol officials, gave him a test that was 13 questions, including what is your name? He got 10 of the 13 questions wrong, including what is your name? And they said, he's fine, and then sent him back again to Mexico. They also sent back at around the same time a little girl with a heart condition who appeared to was having congenital heart failure on the streets of Juarez just a day or two prior. They also returned a child with a kidney condition. And so what you have here is an administration that's not even following its own nonsensical laws, its own nonsensical rules. It creates this system that doesn't work in this MPP system. And they say, we'll exempt children with disabilities. And yet this child, you can just meet with him. You can look at him and it's clear that he's disabled. He smiles compulsively. He holds on to you even though you're a stranger. He hugs every person that he meets, every adult that he meets. He has no sense of barriers. He's not able to articulate most things. He has very few words. And, I'd argue that even his skull appears to be somewhat misshapen in his face. And yet they kept sending him back to Mexico. We finally have gotten him across. He's now in Texas. And we have matched him with pro bono attorneys to work on his asylum claim with his mother. And so there are successes, and there are organizations that are out there that are providing these services. I'm happy to share with you some of the ones that I recommend. But the purpose of Project Amplify was really to get the truth of what's happening to these children out there into the historical record, into the social consciousness, and then the efforts to actually support them legally is happening through organizations like the Center for Constitutional Law and Human Rights and the National Center for Youth Law, Las Americas, and organizations like that, in addition to Lawyer Moms of America, which is our fiscal sponsor.
So I would like to introduce you, Warren, to Diana Duran, who is one of our envoys, and she's in El Paso, and she goes across the border to volunteer and also volunteers on this side of the border with Annunciation House, which is an amazing resource in El Paso. And she might have a question for you and a comment or two that could be really insightful. So Diana, you should be, I'm trying to unmute you, and come on button. What's going, there you go. I think I've got you unmuted, Diana.
Hi. Hi, doctor. Oh my God, I've got so many questions and it's resurfaced so many ugly feelings in me again. I don't even know where to start. I posted so many questions.
Well, I didn't mean to catch you off guard there, Diana, but we're so fortunate to have you as a part of our group, and you make us feel so good that you're always, keeping us abreast of what's going on an ongoing basis. But I did, Annunciation House, I do see that that they have they closed temporarily?
They're closed temporarily because of the MPP policy. When I was volunteering at the Annunciation Center, because I was volunteering every week and helping those individuals that had possible, well, they all had asylum sponsors. And so they were all going to fly out or be driven by bus to their locations. So that was the positive. Annunciation Center was the positive part for us because they were going somewhere. What I could not get to were the ones that were locked up in jails or in the camps, like the children. We're not allowed. I don't even know where they are anymore, because I was part of the Clint protest several times that we did protest, and Beto was very much involved, and he helped kind of initiate the closing of that camp. But then these children were put in foster homes and different settings, and so we didn't know where they were sent. I don't know. I know from my understanding there was another big building being it was getting built on the far east side of El Paso, and it was for children. And I don't know if it's already been done. I don't know if there's any children in there. But every time I would post on Facebook, it would just bring a lot of tears and a lot of angst in me, because I felt so helpless because I could not reach any of these children. I'm sorry. Anyway.
That's okay. That's okay. And I know that you also were going across the border to volunteer on the other side as well.
No. I never went to Juarez. What we were doing, where we were sending donations, and I had another contact person that was doing, the food and the sandwiches and everything, to go to Juarez, to go to those shelters in Juarez, but they had passes to go to Juarez to go give the food to them. But I wasn't one of them. I was not allowed to go over there. I didn't have that permission. I stayed here in El Paso with the Annunciation Center. I have a lot of questions, doctor, because we had doctors at the Annunciation Center, and I was constantly giving him the updates of what was going on with the MPP policy. They called MPP TPP policy, and then it got further enforced, and it got further stricter and stricter, and it got tighter and tighter. And that by March, it had gotten so tight that no migrants were even passing over here. We were getting tons and tons and tons of Brazilians. The Brazilians are now being sent over to Guatemala, because that's where they're being sent. And we would see, they were posting planes of, they were trying to be really covert, like we didn't know what was going on, but they would post the planes that and the bus loads of where they were getting them, and then they were being taken away to Guatemala. And we know Guatemala is a terroristic country. So the hard feelings that I have are how many of these children have already been kidnapped, how many of these children have been killed, how many of these children have been trafficked, what has happened to so many of these children that have been lost, and how many of these children who are still incarcerated throughout the United States, because I have no idea how many camps there are now. I have no idea. Everything's so covert and so secret. How many of these children still are around in our country? What can we do to get it back on the news? Because right now the pandemic is so strong right now that's everything. That's all on the news. But we need to bring back these children and these migrants that are locked up. And now everything that I'm posting is how much the migrants are now being transferred to their countries because they have the coronavirus. So now they're sick and they're being transferred without being taken care of. I was posting also on Facebook the different resources that we had. We had the Annunciation Center Fund. We had and many people, many volunteers. Oh my God, we got so many donations, and we had a group of people that came over in late February, and they came to see our Annunciation Center, and they brought donations. And so their hearts were huge and big in the fact that they were helping in the funding. I've also posted the legal advocacy center for the attorneys who have those cases, and many of those attorneys are volunteer. I was also posting for the legal fund for the bond money for those migrants that were locked up in jails that could go to the Annunciation Center. We had bail bond, then they could go to the Annunciation Center. But I haven't posted probably in the last 3 weeks on anything because everything has been on the virus. So the resources that I am needing, I don't know if everybody else is needing, but I need to know the resources of where I can help financially or what else I can do. If we can get it back on the news, MSNBC is wonderful to get stuff on the news. Forget Fox News, it's always MSNBC. NPR maybe, or I don't know, somebody else that can put it back on, maybe Morning Joe or somebody. But we need to bring it back up in the news. And the question is, how many more children have died that we don't know of? I know I rambled a lot, Scott.
No, that's fine, Diana. I think Warren, Warren, can you give us some ideas, perhaps, about how we might get more publicity, what we can do as an organization? Anything come to mind?
Well, so I've stayed in contact with a lot of the media that we connected with last June, and what they tell us is that they really need for there to be another outrageous situation. You know, that there was a lot of coverage around family separation, there was a lot of coverage around Flint, but without something new, without hard news, we can't get any print. And of course, we're hoping that there is no tragedies to report. So you know, I was hopeful that the events around Project Amplify, the concerts, the exhibits, you know, the books that have been created, that would be another way to raise public awareness about the children's abuse and neglect. And I think that it has, but it hasn't generated more than a few stories, media stories around the events. It's ended up being mostly on social media, which is great, but you know, the reporters tell me straight up that they would love to cover what's happening to the children, but we've got to come to them with fresh news. So we did a Human Rights Watch and I and Stanford's another organization that I partner with. We did a mini presser, is what it's called, after this little boy, we discovered this little boy, and there were actually, you know, we had conducted a lot of interviews of children and families in MPP, and we went to the media because we were concerned about how many children were being abused and neglected. Diana mentioned trafficked. Mexico is the leading source country for trafficked children in the United States. So when she talks about her concern about children being trafficked in Mexico, that is a well-founded concern. When I say that Mexico is the primary source country for children trafficked in the United States, I'm taking that from the US State Department's own reports. So it is absolutely outrageous that we would take children who are here safe in the United States, 89% of whom have family members in the United States, and rather than placing them with their family members, send them to the main source country for trafficked children, especially in areas like around Matamoros that are completely controlled by the gangs. Matamoros and the surrounding area is a level 4 security zone according to the State Department, which means that they cannot protect US government workers. They tell US government workers not to go into that area without express special permission, and yet they are sending literally thousands of children into the Matamoros region. So in any event,
That seems like the story right there to me. If we're going to get this back going, I mean the gangs are controlling the Matamoros camp, and all of what that means. I mean, if that's not a story, I don't know what is.
Right, but what they want is specific stories about specific children.
Yeah.
You know, and what's happening to them. And we, for a long time, the little boy that I told you about, the 6-year-old, we talked about whether or not to go public with his story because the US authorities kept sending him back. And I try and defer to the children, I mean, to the attorneys in the case, because I don't want to undermine their ability to make a strong case for the child. And they at one point said, okay, go ahead and contact the media. And within, you know, an hour and a half, I had multiple reporters who were interested in the story, including the AP. And then the, you know, the children's attorneys pulled the story and said, nope, we're going to try one more time without the public pressure. And so part of it is that we need to do what's best for these children. And that usually means protecting their privacy. And we can't sacrifice these children for the sake of public awareness or, you know, a media story, because that violates the children's rights as well. And so we're trying to do this in an ethical way. And that means that a lot of the tragedies that we hear, we can't go to the media about. We have to get the children's permission in order to take their stories public. And we did have the permission of all the children who gave their sworn testimonies. They understood, or they, you know, it was explained to them that if they gave their testimony, that it would be given to a judge and be made public. And so they had agreed to that, whereas these other children have not.
Yeah. Well, as we wind this down, Warren, one of the comments that's coming up in the chat here with regards to, you know, the frustration we're all feeling about what we can do, and you've done such a great job of describing this kind of catch-22 on so many levels that we're up against. But at the end of the day, it seems like with 6 months and 6 days until the election, there may not be anything more effective that we can do than to try to do everything possible to create just the most massive blue wave that this country has seen ever.
I think that's absolutely right. I speak on this a lot, and what I tell people every single time is that the most important thing that you can do is to vote them out of office, vote for an administration that will, you know, change the way that children are treated in this country, the way that refugees will be treated in these countries. We're not asking for anything other than what the US law provides. We're not asking for anything other than what the international law provides. We're not asking for open borders, but the bottom line is that this administration has shown a total and complete disregard for the rule of law. And regardless of whether a candidate is blue or red or purple or green, we need public leaders that respect the rule of law, that will respect children's rights, that will keep families together, not subject children to abuse and neglect for political purposes. And that means, you know, firing them all.
Right.
All the people who brought this into being.
Well, dang, we are so touched by you and Diana, and as well as Kristen and Dan. Thank you so much for coming on, and thank you also for offering to connect us with some of your colleagues with regards to the artists that we might have on here in the weeks and months to come. And we would love to have you back anytime, and that you would like to join us. And is there anything else you'd like to close with?
No, I'm just so grateful for all of you, for everything that you're doing to be an envoy for humanity, to make the world a better place, each in your own community, in your own way. And so continue to be a bright light that, you know, shines out with love and truth and humanity. And let us all try and be an inspiration to one another. These are really difficult times, and we can't do it alone. But if we see other people doing the right thing and standing up for all that is, you know, true and just, it will help give us all the courage that we need to carry on, even in the darkest of times.
Doctor, are you still, this is probably the last question, are you still going into the camps?
Well, yeah, so I was supposed to be down in on the border this week and next week, but unfortunately we're not getting travel approvals right now. And so what we're trying to do right now is set up video interviews of the children and families instead.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, everybody, thanks for coming out. And I'm thinking that we might still, Kristen, Dan, do y'all have another song left in you to kind of, to help us to have a little hope here? I think we were all touched really deeply there, and I bet y'all have something in store that'd be just right for this time.
Well, we're happy to do one, and it's a song I wrote for Warren and people like Warren, especially women in leadership positions. I don't know if you, those of you from Oregon probably know that our state motto is "She flies with her own wings," and this is what this song's called, and it's on our new record coming out here in June. So it's for you, Warren. She says, come on over, we got work to do. She says, don't just stand there, there's a place for you, and you, and you, and you. This is true, the different points of view, more hands and eyes and hearts to make a plan and follow through. She flies with her own wings, she's on the lookout for better things. She's keeping her eyes on that western horizon. And if a storm is blowing, she's gonna get where she's going. In spite of bruises and bee stings, she relies on her own wings. She says it's only thunder, don't be frightened. The thing to watch for is the lightning. Yeah, the lightning is the thing that destroys. The thunder's just a noise. A bully with a megaphone threatens and annoys. She flies with her own wings. She's on the lookout for better things. She's keeping her eyes on that western horizon. And if a storm is blowing, she's gonna get where she's going. In spite of bruises and bee stings, she relies on her own wings. And up on the timberline, tall stem trees, she's waiting for the sun to rise again. Night fades to morning in. Sky shades are rose and blue. She takes a breath and leaps into the currents of the wind. She flies with her own wings. She's on the lookout for better things. She's keeping her eyes on that western horizon. And if a storm is blowing, she's gonna get where she's going. In spite of bruises and bee stings, she relies on her own wings. She says, come on over, we got work to do. Hang in there, everybody.
Wow. Well, Kari, you want to wrap it up for us and tell everybody what we got in store next week?
Steve, if you want to go ahead and talk about our guests next week, and then I'll wrap up the official portion after that. Thank you so much, guys.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Binford, for being here.
Yeah.
We appreciate what you do and your efforts. It's a beautiful thing. It's a trying time. But we do have a gentleman on next week that's doing great things to try to push the progressive ways. His name is Jeremy Smith. He and a young lady by the name of Madeline Eden founded a company called Civitech. Civitech is a data crunching company that's pushing the progressive campaigns and candidates around the country, especially here in Texas, where we have the Texas 17 under 10 effort going on, where we're trying to flip the Texas House. In addition to Civitech, Jeremy and Maddie also have a nonprofit called Register and the number 2 vote.org, registertovote.org. This nonprofit produces a tool called Map the Vote, which is a unique canvassing app in that it brings up people in your neighborhood or wherever you might be around the country that has probable Democratic voters that are unregistered. So you can go directly to their door and knock on their door. Of course, now and in the times of not canvassing, that's an issue, but maybe we'll get to do that again, and we may use those addresses for getting postcards to voters out. So Jeremy Smith is he's quite an inspiration. I think you'll really love to learn what he and Maddie are working on. And so we'd like to see you here next week. I'm going to leave in the chat a podcast that you can listen to about who Jeremy is, and he explains also how Civitech got started. And we'll also leave a link in the chat about Blue Squad. Blue Squad is it's another app that Jeremy has a separate company. He produces this app that allows people to go on missions, like registering their contacts to vote by mail or doing other actions. And we have combined our efforts with Blue Squad, and we have our own Envoys Blue Squad app now that you can check out. And the link will take you directly to our Blue Squad Envoy app. So tune in next week. You're really going to like to know who Jeremy Smith is.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I'm really excited. I've listened to that podcast. It's a very fantastic podcast, and he has a really great story about where he comes from and the inspiration for all the work that he's doing. So that'll be great. So that'll officially wrap up this session this Monday for our official stuff. Again, if you want to hang around and just chat a little bit, I might go grab a beer. I don't know. So you can stay around. If you're not in our workplace already, go to envoysforhumanity.org and you can sign up and get in our virtual headquarters. Please invite your friends. It's always fun to do this kind of work with friends, and it makes it just easier and better, to try to make change when you're surrounded with the people that you love and respect. And so feel free to invite anybody that you want. Send them that website and we'll get them in. And we're going to be doing some virtual postcards and some virtual phone books soon because we have a couple special elections around the country coming up in May. So it's something we immediately that we can do to help make change. And for this week's action items, make sure you check out the band True North. And I had put their information in the website. Also go to Project Amplify and see the ways that you can help and donate so we can continue to get those messages out because it's so really, really important. So on that note, thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you, Warren. That was fantastic. Like you said, it's hard to hear, but that's information that is so important. And the more people hear it, we can talk about what we've heard directly from a source and keep spreading it and keeping this on people's minds because, definitely with the COVID-19, it has fallen, I think, in the back of people's minds, but it's something that's going to be around even after all this is over, unfortunately. And those kids are still going to be suffering. And so thank you.
Thank you, Warren. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, if you guys want to unmute yourself and you can say thank you. And again, if you need to go, you're more than welcome to go. If anybody wants to stay around and talk, we'll be here for as long as you guys want to hang out and talk.
There you go.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.